Thank you all for being here. Okay, now I hear myself very well. Jeffrey and Bram will lead this workshop/session, so I will leave very soon. I just wanted to say one quick sorry for the coffee, that the coffee machine was not very working very well, but I think that's okay. And I want to just, for those who have time also after the lunch, so this session will take place until 12:30. Then we have lunch until 1:15. And then there's the last site visit to the local hub at Marineterrein at 1:15. So if you want to go to that, there's also the sign-up sheet downstairs. And do you know where Diederik will be? Downstairs. Also downstairs. So so if you have time, go for it. And now I'll give the floor to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Welcome to the session. I am Jeffrey. You are?
Bram.
Okay, and this session is all about frameworks for shared mobility. And yeah, actually we want to learn from you. We don't know very much, so we're going to tell you what we know, what we researched, and then we're going to try to convince you to tell us what you know. But before we start, we would like to know who you are. Maybe I have a presentation, so that's a good thing. So just a second. So, who are you? Just quick, who is from a local government or a government anyway? So I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you tell us which government?
I work for the municipality of Amsterdam.
Amsterdam.
The Wallonia region.
Wallonia. Amsterdam. Okay, so we have 3 cities. Are there operators in the room? No operators. Professionals in mobility? Yeah, okay. You are from? Impact. Impact is?
An NGO was working on shared mobility.
Okay, that's good. You are?
I work at TomTom.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. And then? Okay, so we have quite a nice public.
I'll do it with the mic.
Okay, but yeah, it's too late. So before we go further with you, we're gonna tell you a little bit what we know. First of all, we work for autodelen.net. It's actually carsharing.net in English, and we are a kind of network for shared mobility. So we have one mission, and that's convincing people, convincing governments to get rid of the privately owned car. And we give an alternative in shared mobility. And of course, public transport and biking, and but there are too many cars, so we want to get rid of the private cars. We were the inventor or the co-inventor of the first Green Deal in Flanders. We were actually inspired from the Green Deal in the Netherlands, the Green Deal car sharing. We are also the co-inventor of the concept of mobipunten, or the e-hubs in Flanders. And we organize together with Impact the yearly unconventional symposium Shared Mobility Rocks. So that is who we are. And a few years ago, we were involved in an Horizon 2020 project, and we researched about car sharing. So this session is about frameworks for shared mobility. But I think to make it concrete, we focus a bit on car sharing as a framework, because you can draw the line also to shared bikes or cargo bikes. But the first thing we researched was how is the playing field of car sharing, how is it connecting with each other? So basically you have 3 forms of car sharing. There is a round trip car sharing, Green Wheels in the Netherlands, Cambio in Germany. And then you have free floating, that's like Green Mobility or Poppy in Belgium. I think in Germany, Share Now used to be here, but I don't think they are still here. I look at Amsterdam. They're still here, so that's the free-floating thing. And then something similar or something different is the peer-to-peer car sharing, or the sharing of privately owned cars. And in Belgium, you have 2 systems. You have a system like you have in the Netherlands, how do you call it? I forgot it.
Snapcar?
Snapcar, yes. So that's like Airbnb, but instead of a house, you put a car on a website, and then everybody can ask you, "Can I use your car?" And then you pay each other. So that's that. In the round trip car sharing, you have two systems. You have station based and you have operational area. What does it mean? Station based is you pick up a car, you bring it back to the same place. An operational area is you pick up a car and you put it again in the same area. For instance, around the station. That could be an operational area. And in the free floating, you have basically the same. Either you have an operational system, most of the time that's a city. You can pick up a car with your smartphone and you can leave it everywhere in the city. Sometimes it's even possible to get rid of the car in another city or at the airport. That's also possible. And then mostly if you have free floating with electric cars, you are talking about pool stations because electric cars has to be charged and then you have to go to the same place, a pool station. So those are the things, and it's very important to see that because there are different systems, and also in the European of the the project stars, we did research around Europe, which system is where most popular, and what do we see? In the Western Europe, we see that station-based or round-trip car sharing is most popular. Also, the west of Europe is the geographical area where car sharing has been born in Europe, has been born and launched in Europe. So if you go to the south, where car sharing is much more new, it's something from the last decades maybe, and there you see free floating is more popular, and free floating is also more new system. If you go to the north, there you see privately cars are more shared. So peer-to-peer is more popular in the north, and in the eastern of Europe, it's also very new. So it's also free floating. If we look at the types of car sharing, this is a research we did this year in Flanders and in Belgium. You can see that the different types of car sharing have also a different use, and that's very important if you're talking about frameworks, but because you want to have everything covered in one framework. For instance, the peer-to-peer car sharing, you see that the trips are much longer and taking much more time than, for instance, the free-floating car sharing. That's like 30 minutes or something. So also the mileage is different. And why are we telling this? Well, another thing that's very interesting to see is if we are looking at car sharing and the car ownership, we did research, people who are sharing a car, are they owning other cars? And you can tell that station-based car sharing people have less cars than people who are not sharing a car. You can see it. I don't know if you can see it because it's very small for me, but I'm going to show those. So the right one, that's the non-users. So that is not people who are sharing a car. And the left is the round trip, and you can see that people who are doing the round trip car sharing possess much less cars than people who don't. If you look at the free floating, and that's very crazy, they own more cars than the non-car sharing people. So that's different. You could conclude that free floating is a bad system and you can't support it. But, and this is the interesting part, if you look at people who are combining round trip and free floating, that's the second bar, then you can see that the impact is very big. So the thing we want to say with this, don't say round trip is best or free floating is best or peer-to-peer is best. We think the ecosystem is best, and you have to put everything in perspective, and as a government you have to have a framework that is good for all kinds of car sharing, because they attract also different target groups. So that's also very important. So that was my story. Bram will take over and tell you a bit more about the frameworks in itself.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Just for your information, the ones we based on, and it's also in the presentation, is about we based our research on the accreditation system in the UK from our partner organization Como UK. We base ourselves on the definition of car sharing by BCS, Bundesverband Car Sharing in Germany. Also, really interesting research they are doing on frameworks. There's also the Blauer Angel, also in Germany, which is setting a high standard for operators in terms of ecological aspects. You had the label of car sharing autopartage in Ile-de-France. We have the Paris regulation for free floating and also for round trip systems that are really interesting. The Bremischer Landes Car Sharing Gesetz, also one we read very carefully to bring all this information together. And also we have our own definition in our advisory board consisting of all Flemish operators, where we define what is car sharing, for example, what are the needs to be part of our advisory board, etc. It's just a short summary of interesting things that are around there. And if you want more information on this, the link is beneath the information. So it's really interesting to take a look at it from a government side if you want to regulate or to give frameworks to shared mobility. So actually, why is it important, we think, to have a framework or a regulation for shared mobility? I think, first of all, there's a strong need for demarcation and definitions of shared mobility, because it's still a rather new concept, and we see, for example, car rental mobility is something different than shared mobility, although sometimes the line between the two is very small. So the need for demarcation can be definitely part of a shared mobility framework. Also very important to facilitate the growth in offer and demand in the future in a city, and also to support the model shift. As you have seen in the thing Jeffrey told about free floating and round trip and the combination of the systems, we believe that a framework is there to also give specific incentives to different systems in order that they support model shift or not. As I said, basis for incentives to diversify per operational model, this based on impact. Very important for us that the incentives the government is giving are based on the impact different systems have. It's a basis for local authorities and administrators of public domain to give parking permits, for example. It's a one-time procedure also for operators. They are not here today, but for them it's really interesting because it's a one-time procedure, especially, for example, in Flanders. We want this on a regional level, that they don't have to go to every municipality, every city. That's a lot of work for them, and by having a one-time procedure in a framework, they can actually focus on what they have to do, is make sure their service is in place in the city and customers are happy. And what we think it's interesting to see, as we said, at least on a regional, national, or even a European level, to have like internal market, that car sharing in Germany is the same as car sharing, or defined the same at least as car sharing in Belgium or in the Netherlands or France, etc. What we think, and based on the research we did, are some basic elements of a framework. First of all, it should be flexible, straightforward, and future-proof, because we see shared mobility is a very innovative market. Car sharing has been there for some decades, but we see last years with free-floating bikes, sharing systems, e-scooters, etc., that it should be future-proof, and you don't want to change the framework every 2 or 3 years. So that's very important to take that into account. Is that a shared mobility framework has minimal quality requirements for all operators, for example, on safety, on accessibility of the services, that it should be, for example, accessible 24 hours, 24/7. The pricing, that it should be clear for the customer how much it will cost, etc. And incentives, as I mentioned already, are impact-based. Clear definitions on what is car sharing, what is bike sharing, what is a shared vehicle. These sort of things should be also part of a framework in order to, as I mentioned, the demarcation, the differences with leasing, with car and rental mobility, etc. Also, very clear requirements in terms of data handling and data sharing between a government and the operator. It's also part of the of the framework, especially also if you want to give incentives based on impact. You as a government, of course, you have to know the data from an operator, what the impact on the field is. Periodic delivery of data, as I mentioned, very important. That can be static data, impact, user experience, etc. These sort of things are important to gather. And also, lastly, I think that, for example, in the city of Ghent, they have this. It's a possibility for a temporary permit, which means that you have, as an operator, 1 or 2 years to comply with the regulation. So you don't have to comply from the start, but you have the time to grow and to be in line with what the city or region is demanding. So that's, I think, it as an introduction.
Yeah.
Are there any questions at this moment? If not, we will go to the interactive part, and we will ask you. Yes, please.
Can you
Maybe just a
Oh,
second.
the mic. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I am Jeffrey, not Mike.
The mic from Jeffrey. Can you maybe give an example on how policy frameworks can be flexible? Because we as a municipality make a lot of policy, but I cannot say it's quite flexible though.
Well, I think indeed is quite difficult, but what I remember from the discussion yesterday, which I think was really interesting, that, for example, in Amsterdam, you are struggling with the bottom-up initiatives. And, for example, what Brussels is doing is interesting, that they have a framework for commercial operators and also framework for bottom-up initiatives. So that's a first thing you can do, to be a bit flexible, to not have everything combined in just one framework, but seeing what is this form of car sharing, what are the needs, and then by that you can, I think, be a bit more flexible. But of course, I know it as a government, it's not always easy to be very flexible. So you have some examples?
Well, I would like to add that if you're talking about a framework on a national level or a regional level, that should be like having minimal criteria, and every city can say we're going to add something. For instance, I can imagine that a city like Amsterdam says we have space in our city for like 3 or 4 operators. Well, that's something you can add to the framework. So that's no big deal. So that's flexible, because the basic criteria are from the government, from the national government, and you as a city can play with those things. Just a second. That's for the
Mike is coming.
Thank you. Could you elaborate a bit on the impact-based incentives? Because I think usually it's based on usage, so I don't know if there are other options.
I think Jeffrey...
Yeah. Well, if you're talking about impact of car sharing, then I think the 2 most important things are car ownership, less car ownership, of course, and modal shift. So, and some systems have a bigger impact on car ownership than others. For instance, a round-trip car sharing system is replacing, depending on the location, of course, but it's replacing between 10 to 15 privately owned cars. So that's a big impact. A free-floating system is not that big in the change of car ownership. So you give more incentives to round-trip car sharing than free-floating car sharing. Also, a round-trip station-based car sharing system needs to have dedicated parking spots, definitely, because that's the business model. A free-floating system only needs parking permits for the whole area. So, in that way, you can play with the incentives based on impact and on other things.
Sorry. Yeah, I wanted to. I mean, we're in Brussels. We're starting to have some discussions about car sharing regulations that will be revised in the coming years. At least that's the plan, and the discussions are starting. And we had some similar discussions, or discussions like that are starting right now. And something that I sometimes feel is a bit missing is that we're rarely talking about to actually create a level playing field for all actors. I, whenever this question comes up, I'm thinking about the fact that not all app operators are the same, and especially when you think about share now. That's really the big car industry that's behind that. I mean, that's BMW and Daimler, and that is certainly not people who are doing car sharing to get people out of cars, but it's also a marketing tool to them. So really, not everybody who's doing car sharing really has the same objectives, or has this objective to actually lead to less car traffic, less cars, and get people out of cars. And then I'm always thinking about, well, we're talking about, for example, liberating operating conditions and pricing and such things. So aren't you afraid that huge companies like BMW and Daimler can use a very liberalized pricing system to price competitors out of the market? ShareNow is now already the biggest car sharing operator in Germany, for example. So they really have some market power, and I'm wondering whether you have some thoughts about that to make sure there's really a level playing field that guarantees that operators with different objectives, non-profit operators, profit-based but not car industry, and also the services offered by the car industry really operate under the same conditions. And we don't have this risk that car sharing is actually being used in the wrong way to go in the other direction than what we actually want.
Okay.
I think this is in line with what Jeffrey is saying. If indeed you have operators that have few or no impact on the things we actually want in a city, that they can operate in a city because they are in line with the permit, but they will get not the incentives than other operators will get that have impact in a city. So I think that's a really important one. And a framework should not say that we are completely liberalizing the market and everyone can access. At least, I mean, it should be possible for everyone to access the market, but the incentives you give as a city should be different from one operator to another, based on the impact. And for that reason, it's very important to get enough data from them, what their impact is. And if in the future ShareNow is having a great impact on all the things we mentioned, then we should be happy, I think. But if they are not, they should not get the incentives than another operator that has this impact.
Based on the figures you showed, it's no surprise that you're free floating because it doesn't change much in terms of car ownership.
Yeah, but then you are looking only at one aspect, and that's our message. And if you're talking about free floating, who cares that they want to sell cars because it's not working? Actually, it's like that the free floating market is attracting different people to car sharing. Round trip car sharing is not attracting those people, and I see it as a stepping stone theory. They start with a free floating car because they want to try it, it's easy, and then they see, oh, that's actually very easy, and then they get rid of their own car and they start car sharing in a regular way. So I'm a little bit optimistic about that, but I'm also afraid of the misuse of free floating car sharing. But you have to have a combination, and you have to use them like they try to use the system.
Yeah, and I think it's quite complex sometimes. I mean, this is just one research we showed. I mean, there are some researches, recent researches that show that free floating car sharing can have an impact on sustainable mobility in a city. I mean, the one from, I forgot the name, it's from the Susmo project, I think, but in north of Europe. So it's really, it's sometimes a complex thing.
Yeah, and maybe a last thing about that. ShareNow or BMW and Mercedes are not doing the car sharing anymore because it's been taken over by Stellantis. So they won't get rich of it, in fact, because they quit the business. So it's, for us, it's a good thing that you have different schemes. Other questions?
If not, we go to...
Yeah. So, may I have your attention, please? Will the real people who are sharing a car please stand up? Please stand up. Please stand up. Yes, you can stand up.
Yes.
Yes, we.
Okay.
Wat moeten we doen?
Yeah, we have to say goodbye to
Okay.
the online...
Okay. Okay. It's online also.
Yes, goodbye.
So now we're gonna have to do something interactive because we want to know what the people in the room are thinking, and maybe they have some experiences that can work for other frameworks because frameworks are rather new. So it's interesting to learn from each other, and now we're gonna try to have a kind of learning network together. So for the online viewers, bye. See you later, and the physical viewers, please stand up.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can.
Yeah. So if you could please stand up, take your share, and put them on the sides because we have to make sure all the shares are gone. So yes, do we start with your